as I said at our statewide conference, this was the easiest it's been to get people to quietly come in and sit down. At the Copley Plaza in May, it takes literally hours to get people to sit down. So thank you all. Thank you all for being here. And I apologize. I understand there's been accidents and traffic has been terrible, and I'm afraid we may have lost some people, and even the number of board members for Preservation Massachusetts is pretty slim here this evening. So I'm going to, I was going to introduce Bill Wallace, who is the executive director here at the Worcester Historical Museum, who has been a close friend of mine for many, many years. He's 41 years as director here at the Worcester Historical Museum. And he was here earlier this evening, but he has kind of like the evening. He has been ill all week and wasn't quite sure he was going to be able to come and give us a welcome. So just to let everyone know, he has been great to Preservation Massachusetts. He's certainly done an amazing job here in the city of Worcester as far as collecting history, sharing history. And for any of you who are not familiar with the Worcester Historical Museum, please come back and visit, because it's an extraordinary place. So I am now going to introduce Mike Rosenberg, who is the chair of Preservation Massachusetts with Bank of America, has been our chair now for several years, is going to stay with us for a little while longer, and has done just a magnificent job. So this is going to be opening our business meeting. Mike?
Thank you, Jim. Thanks very much. And welcome, everybody. It's good to see you here. I hope you all didn't have as much difficulty making the journey as we did on the Mass Pike today. It was a 2.5-hour trip from Boston. But I'm very glad to be here. I'm very glad to be here and with all of you, too. Before we start the business meeting, I just wanted to make a couple of comments. No long speeches, just a couple of comments. And the first is that I really have to call out the great work that our leadership team, Jim and Aaron, have done over the last year. I think this has been another really strong year for Preservation Massachusetts. We've done a lot. We've reached a lot of people. They've reached out to many communities, and I don't want to take that for granted. I want to acknowledge all that they do for us throughout the year. So, Anne, and just to highlight a few of the things, I mean, there are many things that happened this year. I don't want to talk about all of them, but just to highlight a few of them. First, we had a terrific statewide conference in the fall in Lowell, and we had 250 people came to that conference, and we had great sessions, and people learned a lot. They learned from the sessions, but they also learned from each other. And I know I felt that the buzz there was extremely positive. It was very positive, and I think we're getting the sense from the feedback, the actual feedback from the participants, that it really was a great experience. So that was very rewarding. And now we're already starting to think in terms of the next conference, which will be in 2019. And I'm sure that the team will be working hard on that. We'll hear more about it. We also had a very successful dinner and awards event this year, in which we recognized and acknowledged so many contributions in preservation, so many important contributions to communities throughout the Commonwealth in what's being done and what's being done, and what we hope will continue to be done in the coming years. And we had a terrific turnout, and it was just another great video presentation, and it was another very successful event for us. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention all of the work that goes on throughout the year, reaching out to folks all over the Commonwealth. That's done by our circuit riders. And I see Stacya's here. I don't see Jeff here tonight, but we have. Okay, that's a good excuse. Well, we'll accept that. That's a good excuse. But our circuit riders are out in the community all of the time. This year they made over 200 contacts or connections with people, providing them with information and technical assistance. So we're very proud of the work that Stacia and Jeff do and have done this year, and we look forward to that continuing as well. And then finally, I want to mention, and you're going to hear more about this in a few minutes, the Cruising the Commonwealth. And Jim and Aaron were cruising together this summer throughout the Commonwealth. On Station too, they were cruising. That's quite a crew that was cruising. Yes, and so, but there was a great effort on their part to reach out throughout the Commonwealth. They had, I understand, 10 stops. There were 10 communities, 10 meetings. They had over 100 people who came, and this is a year about reaching out, about connecting, and I think it's going to provide us with a lot of energy for the upcoming year. And as I said, we're going to hear more about that tonight. So those are just a few of the things that I think were highlighted a very productive year. So with all that said, why don't we go into our business meeting at this point? And I will introduce Dan Kolodner, our clerk. And as Dan is walking up here, I also want to acknowledge our board members. We have a very, very good, very committed board of directors, and I'm very proud to be able to chair that board. So I want to, and any board members stand up, Steve, I see, but I don't know. Yeah, thank you for coming. And Mary, yes. So we have three board members.
So this is the annual meeting, so bear with me. There's a very little bit of actual business we have to take care of, and this is what I call the call and response part of the evening. Call order boards by membership. Okay, so the first vote is that the members accept or amend and accept the 2016 annual meeting minutes from November 3rd, 2016 at the Worcester Historical Museum, 330 Elm Street in Worcester. The minutes have been made available on the Preservation Massachusetts website, and there are copies here as well. So I would hereby make a motion to approve those minutes. Motion to approve. Can I get a? Excellent. So opposed? Excellent. The motion carries. Okay, so the next one is that the following persons are elected as members of the board of directors, so that the composition of the board is as follows. I'm going to spare you all reading out all the names, but these are the names for a 3-year term. These are the names for a 2-year term. And these are the names for a 1-year term. Do I have a motion to approve the board slate as listed above? And I believe I make a motion, so can anyone second? Opposed? Excellent. So I would also like to very briefly thank our newest board members, Josh Cohen of Beacon Communities and Maureen Kavanaugh of VHP. Maureen is in the back. I believe Josh could not make it, getting water, because she's going to be presenting shortly. And we have one party board member, Rita Walsh. Rita has served on the board since 2005. She was a great supporter and has always been a great supporter of Preservation Massachusetts and Preservation Massachusetts' programs. She has retired from her position at VHB and relocated to lovely Michigan. And we all wish her the best and send out good thoughts to her. So my role is now officially completed. Thank you for listening and the call and response. We had a vibe there going, so that's impressive. And I'm going to introduce Evan for good job. The reason why you have me come
So this is why we have the lawyer come up and do that. You would have to come up with something else. So I am obviously not Pamela Bailey, our treasurer for the board of directors. Pam unfortunately was not able to be here due to some family issues, but I work very closely with Pam in preparing the financial reports. I go to the board and also working on the budget. So in talking with Jim, I will just present the finances, and to make the actual motion, I can defer to, I know Dan as a lawyer can tell me if I have to defer to him as an actual board member to make a motion, but I do not. Okay, so so looking at our 2017 fiscal year highlights, it's our 13th consecutive year in the black, which is great. Just some fiscal year highlights. We had a remarkable awards event that exceeded our budgeted goals. We also successfully funded the 2017 Statewide Preservation Conference. And also, we are going to be adding a third full-time employee, which is going to increase the capacity of our organization. Back in January, our longtime program manager, Courtney Whelan, actually left the organization, feeling like she was ready for the next phase of her career. And I don't need to steal any of Jim's thunder, but as of December 1st, Stacia Kaplanson will be our third full-time employee as circuit rider and also special projects manager. So we are very excited to have her with us 40 hours a week full-time, and that's just going to increase what the organization is going to be able to do. So we're very happy about that. Looking ahead, we are development focused to get our Eastern Massachusetts circuit rider integrated into our budget. For the past 3 years, Jeff Gagne has been grant funded by the Keene Charitable Foundation, and we are looking to expand our opportunities to bring him into our regular organizational fundraising so we can have him on and not worry about grants with him. And also there's also a constant effort to keep expenses down, but keep the organizational impact high. So our revenues, as you can see, were $515,367, and our expenses were just about just shy of $506,000. So financial breakdown, you can see events and conferences made up 43% of our revenue, membership and donations 16%, grants, program service fees, and other is that's where our revenue came from. And our financial breakdown, program services 40%, fundraising and program development 39%, and management and general expenses 22%. And I will say that our fiscal year 2017 audit is ongoing, and if anyone has any questions or questions about the financials or the audit, please feel free to contact either myself or Jim, and we will get right back to you. So I don't know if I make a motion to approve the financials or if that's the financial figure. We hear a motion to approve the financials. So moved. Okay. Second. I know that the lawyer left the room, so. Motion. So luckily, that's the conclusion of the business portion of the meeting, and I will now defer to Jim.
Thank you, Erin, and thanks, Dan. And at this moment, why don't we close the business portion of the meeting? Okay.
So we'll get into the more interesting part of the evening. I want to thank the board of directors. As the, president or executive director, whatever my title is, I certainly appreciate, we do have the best board of directors that I have been involved with in, 20 some odd years. It's a great group of people. They work very hard. They are great counsel. Mike has been a great chair. And obviously my staff with Aaron and with Stacia and Jeff and our part-time admin person really kind of make the place run pretty well. So back in 1994, I'm going way back here, nearly 25 years ago, a special commission on historic preservation was formed to develop statewide recommendations. It became known as the Duran Commission, and I was fortunate enough to be part of that esteemed group of 24 individuals. I was then representing Secretary of State Mike Conley, and after many meetings during 1993, 6 broad categories of action were identified that hopefully would strengthen preservation efforts in Massachusetts. They were assisting private property owners, promoting public stewardship, integrating preservation and planning, educating our citizens, strengthening heritage tourism, and linking preservation and business. And I know people like Jim Alexander remember the Duran Commission. There may be some others here who do. Probably not as many, Jim, as we might think. There's far too much information in these broad topics to go into detail, but you get the general idea that was on the minds of people interested and concerned about historic preservation back in 1994. Over the years, there have been efforts to address some of these issues. Obviously, preservation has become much more sophisticated. Many more professionals have come out with degrees and have entered the field of historic preservation. And I, for one, have kept an executive summary of the findings of the Duran Commission on my desk. It was a very worthwhile exercise. And to reiterate, there were some really good people who were involved. We've seen the creation of the Community Preservation Act, which now includes over 172 cities and towns since its inception in 2000. A number of those communities just recently, Springfield, we have our Springfield friends here today, Holyoke, Pittsfield, Boston, some major cities have joined CPA. There have been over 4,400 appropriations in historic preservation and 27,000, give or take, acres of open space preserved. So CPA is doing its job. We've created the State Historic Tax Credit, which was done in 2003, which in combination with the Federal Historic Credit has resulted in hundreds of thousands of development dollars being invested in our Commonwealth, as well as hundreds of buildings being restored, revitalized over the entire Commonwealth. This would have been unimaginable in 1994. The Commission listened, put out their priorities, and preservation community went to work. We at Preservation Worcester, there's still very much that needs to be done to make certain that preservation is as important as it can be here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. What better way than our Cruising the Commonwealth tour? What still remains to be done since 1994? What new challenges are now in front of us? What are today's priorities? Our tour was a great opportunity to reconnect and hear from local advocates and partners in order to hear what their needs and concerns are. 2017 was our opportunity to step up and listen, to introduce ourselves to folks who may not have known us across the Commonwealth, to even give Chris Skelly, who's here tonight from the Mass Historical Commission, an opportunity to hear from people as he was preparing his statewide preservation plan for 2018 to 2022. Now we can begin to strategically create some action steps to make what we heard as priorities as a possible reality with the support and the determination of our preservation partners and our stakeholders. So having said all of that, and with a little bit of history, let's present Cruising the Commonwealth. Aaron?
All right, we have to before. Communication is essential for the growth, development, and strengthening of any organization, network, and partnership. Since 1985, Preservation Massachusetts has been a leader and partner for preservation initiatives in our Commonwealth, in the Northeast, and even nationally. We have seen a lot of success, our fair share of losses and challenges, but we are proud of all our community has achieved over the past 3 decades. Within the past few years, Preservation Massachusetts felt that, as busy as we have been with programs and initiatives, we have not been in great communication with people around the Commonwealth. There is a lot going on that we know about, but there is a lot happening that we are not aware of, and a lot of people, organizations, and communities may not know who Preservation Massachusetts is, or what resources and networks exist to assist them and their preservation, revitalization, and community-focused work. As the statewide preservation advocacy organization, understanding the needs that exist is essential to being an effective organization, resource, and partner. Thus, the idea of Cruising the Commonwealth was born. Cruising the Commonwealth was a series of 10 meetings across the state, hearing directly from local partners, organizations, and individuals about issues, needs, thoughts, challenges, wishes, successes, and ideas for the future related to historic preservation. We ventured out to hear how you envisioned a statewide organization serving you better, what programs would be helpful, what you really need to make preservation possible in your communities. We wanted to hear not only from those involved with preservation, but other groups whose work intersects or correlates with preservation activities statewide, or anyone who is interested but would not necessarily call themselves preservationists. Armed with a full tank of gas and a laptop, we were prepared to do a whole lot of note-taking and listening. And we were not disappointed. Our first meeting in Barnstable had well over 30 people from all across Cape Cod in the middle of July. They were actively involved in preservation and wanted to discuss, network, and share ideas. The meeting trend continued as we moved westward across the state, hearing about the incredible work that local partners were doing in their communities in terms of education, outreach, and empowering people to preserve their neighborhoods. As we traveled, we found a lot of similar issues and concerns related to lack of funding, lack of appreciation, and a general understanding of preservation, frustration, but also we found unwavering optimism that preservation is important to communities and the many people dedicated to it. The tour gave us the chance to get in front of over 100 individuals representing everything from local nonprofits, volunteers, state and national agencies, to local advocates, private businesses, municipal employees, and students. As we took copious notes, the trends began to emerge, and while each region is certainly unique, and each meeting had its own specific feeling and topics, there were overarching issues that we knew would arise. Our goal was to identify the top 4 priorities that we heard because of the tour and through our online survey. Preservation Massachusetts staff cruised the Commonwealth between July 10th and August 9th, with an additional meeting at the Statewide Preservation Conference in Lowell this past September. It was a great opportunity to see the different parts of the Commonwealth, and it certainly made us appreciate just how varied the regions are, their different needs, and how preservation plays a role in each of them. With the tour officially concluded, we compiled our notes and began to sift through, looking for the top 4 priorities to present at this annual meeting. It was amazing to see so many commonalities and the stark differences as well. Words like community, neighborhood, conversations, partnerships, resources were mentioned repeatedly, along with the most popular word, education. Some places focused on funding for preservation, while others focused more on the need for skilled preservation tradespeople. Some focused more on regulation, while others discussed the need to advertise and promote resources and how-to guides. The top 4 preservation priorities that were identified through Cruising the Commonwealth will help form the future of Preservation Massachusetts work in 2018 and beyond. Number 1, education. Expanding and promoting education, understanding, and awareness about historic preservation. This applied not just to schools, but also to the public. How can we better educate them and make preservation relevant to them in their lives? It also touched on the need for skilled labor training and more educational opportunities for preservationists statewide. Number 2, building connections and partnerships. Staying connected, networked, and growing our relationships in our communities and beyond. We cannot operate in a vacuum, and reaching out to organizations and others who have similar goals and visions is important, as is connecting with younger generations who may not consider themselves traditional preservationists. Number 3, improved access to more resources and information. In addition to online resources such as how-to guides and FAQs, more funding for preservation projects is always an issue, as well as making sure that existing programs like the Community Preservation Act and the Massachusetts Historic Rehabilitation Tax Credit remain in place and well funded. Number 4, reactive versus proactive. How can preservationists be more effective as a movement? Preservation will always have a reactive component, but how can we be more proactive and engaging in ways that may not be focused solely on regulation? This was no mere exercise or sightseeing excursion, as fun as it was. The information that we gathered will serve as the foundation for a preservation summit in early 2018. It is our wish to bring together the Massachusetts Statewide Preservation Coalition, along with other partners and stakeholders, to collectively begin planning action steps to achieving these priorities. This is the future of our preservation work in Massachusetts, and we are extremely thankful to all who participated in the Cruising the Commonwealth meetings and who took our online survey. This process is by no means at an end. It is just the beginning. We welcome your thoughts and input as we move ahead in a positive, collaborative, and open-minded way to accomplish what is most important for your preservation community. For that is what we are. It is not just Preservation Massachusetts alone. It is all of us, from volunteer to professional, nonprofit to business, and those who we have yet to bring to the table. Preservation is a community, and we look forward to building that community even stronger in the months and years ahead. Well, thank you all very much. Preservation, it really was fun to get out there all across the Commonwealth, and Jim will blame me repeatedly for taking away his entire summer vacation because I made him drive all across the state. But it really was fun. It was great to actually go and meet people in their own communities. I think it was very important for us as a statewide organization. And we said from the beginning we didn't want this, our thoughts and our notes to go into a binder and then just to go on a shelf, that we really wanted this to be a process, something that would actually continue on, and that people weren't coming to a meeting just to say things that weren't going to actually be utilized. So we look forward to working on putting on this day-long summit together in early 2018, and want to keep a channel for input open. We will be creating a Cruising the Commonwealth page on our website where this iMovie will be. And we will have a place for people to submit thoughts and comments continually over the next several months. And we'll also be finalizing an executive summary of our Cruising the Commonwealth tour, culminating with some of the discussion points that will be touched on at our during our panel discussion. And the notes from each of our meetings will also be made available, because there were some really great nuggets of information and really great specific suggestions and comments made at each of the 10 stops that we made. So we really want to make sure that those are available to people that took part. So now we're going to move on to our panel discussion, and I would invite our panelists to make their way to the front of the room. And as they come up here, I will say that all throughout our tour, we heard a lot about where preservation is now and about things going on now. And the priorities that we heard really represent an opportunity for a new chapter in preservation in Massachusetts. And the great panel that we have assembled here tonight, we have asked them to talk about their thoughts about the future of preservation in light of the priorities that we heard, which are, nothing, earth-shattering or new, but in light of the priorities, we've asked them to draw in their personal experiences in preservation, their thoughts and ideas, and we see this discussion as a springboard to our summit conversation early next year. And thank you all very much for for agreeing to be on the panel, and I will introduce them beginning at the far left. We have Greg Farmer, who is a preservation consultant and circuit rider with the Connecticut Trust for Historic Preservation. We then have Maureen Cavanaugh, Preservation Massachusetts board member and Director of Cultural Resources for VHB. We then have Chris Skelly, Director of Local Government Programs with Massachusetts Historical Commission. And we have a little bit of a change up. We are so very lucky to have Kathleen Kolanowitz, who is the Director of the District Office for Congressman James McGovern, but she is also a former select board member from the town of Northborough and has been active in preservation locally in her community. And then finally, we have Albert Retz with McCrosty Historic Advisors. But Albert, as many of you know, was also the former director of the Boston Preservation Alliance. So thank you all so very much. And I don't know if I can, is there a way to shut that off? Yeah, I think we're all set. So Bill is going to, Bill, thank you very much, Bill. So thank you all so very much. So Jim has asked me to moderate, but what we kind of envisioned tonight was this to be a panel discussion, but also to be kind of like an organic discussion. It's nothing structured. And if you didn't know, we are actually live streaming right now. Jim's computer is right there, and this is actually live on YouTube, so we will have a record of tonight. So amazing how technology can work. Thank you very much, Bill. So I guess I will just throw out there, and I'm not going to call on anyone specifically, so just feel free to voice your opinion as feel free to chime in. In light of the preservation priorities that we heard, specifically education, building connections and partnerships, improved access to resources and information, and being more proactive versus reactive. In light of these things, what does the preservation community need to, how can we grow in order to meet these priorities? I know that's a pretty big question. Any thoughts on what we may have to do to kind of get to to kind of meet some of these priorities?
All right, I'll start. Fire.
Jump right in. Thank you, Greg.
So, first of all, I have to thank PreservationMass for taking the lead in this and conducting the Cruising the Commonwealth tour. I think that's one of our most essential functions, is to actually get out there on the street and talk to people, not just people who self-identify as preservationists, but people who may have some interest in preservation and don't really know a whole lot about it, or the information that they have is outdated, which is what we encounter frequently. So getting out there and really talking to people makes a huge difference in understanding how our words are heard on the street and in these communities, and what we think we're saying as opposed to what people are hearing from us. I think we've made great strides in organizing preservation in a way that has resulted in financial incentives and in regulatory frameworks. I think, unfortunately, we've done not quite so good a job in winning the hearts and minds of people on the street and in the neighborhoods and in the smaller towns. And even among the municipal officials, there's still a lot of resistance when they hear those words, historic preservation. The assumption is it's going to cost more money, it's going to slow things down, and it's going to keep us from doing what we want to do. So if there's one big challenge that faces, that would be the one that I would highlight, is to make our message clearer to the people on the street, and especially municipal officials who unfortunately continue to work on an assumption of historic preservation as it was in the 1960s rather than as it is today.
I'll jump in. So I think that's exactly right. So I come from a political background, so everything to me is about grassroots. So I think that municipal officials are a wonderful place to start with advocacy for helping them to understand why community preservation can also be an economic driver in their community. I do think that there's some opportunity to partner potentially more with historic commissions in the municipalities, because there's sort of the entry, the gateway drug to historic preservation for every community. For myself, and I've had the great pleasure to work with Jim and with Albert on a project in my own community, people sort of start to come out of the woodwork when they recognize the fact that they have a relationship with a property that they have history with. And so it's not just people that identify as historic preservationists, but people who have emotional connection to any property. So if there is a way to get to those people, I think you're right, that it's through the municipal officials, but also even more granular to the historic commissions and to PTOs and school committees and folks that just are rooted in the community, so that they can understand the positive impact it can have, not only because it enhances our lives, but because it can have economic benefit and other benefits to the community. So let's talk to all those people, doctors.
And I'll just add on to that. You know, Tip O'Neill said all politics is local. All preservation really feels local at times. And I think, you know, we can look back at, I was actually around with the Durant Commission. It was my first year working at Historic Massachusetts Incorporated, now PreservationMass. Look at what happened out of the Durant Commission, and especially out of CPA, the Community Preservation Act, and giving communities the choice to raise money for, you know, the three legs of the school, open space, historic preservation, affordable housing, which I think did a couple of things. It brought those three groups maybe a little closer together, not quite as competitive, but it did give the opportunity to provide municipal officials with dollars in order to work on projects. And I think that's probably one of the best accomplishments that we've had in historic preservation, next to the state historic tax credit in the last 20 years, relative to bringing those dollars to bear. Because I think Greg's absolutely right that the second you say historic preservation, and I'm working in a couple of municipalities now. Northborough is very different in the fact that they voted at their town meeting to spend $1.7 million to acquire a building. 2.4 total. So that was it was very impressive for the town to do that. But there are a few places where I'm working right now. When you sit down with the city council, the first thing they want to know is how much it's going to cost and how can we pay for it, right? So part of that, it's a reasonable question, but it's also part of it is the education about how important these resources are and what kind of difference they can make within the communities. So I think Greg's hit the nail on the head with that, relative to educating city councils and councilors, and how can we get more involved with the municipalities to show them that there are positive solutions. These things aren't always a negative or a stain from a community perspective.
So I think the question was, how can we help preservation grow? And I agree with all these initiatives, but I also think the preservation movement was born out of people wanting to protect they felt their culture, their social, economic, spiritual resources were being affected by urban renewal, things of that sort. And there's been a lot of legislation put in place. A lot of that legislation is directed towards the built environment, and most specifically buildings, and that's the area I work in, so I don't want that to go away. But I think the preservation movement really needs to reflect the diversity that the country is in and where it's moving. And the preservation movement in general is not a very diverse community in terms of people coming out of the university programs, in the fields we work in. And I think it needs to be more reflective of the resources and that the diverse communities want to protect, and what means things to them, and how can we engage them. And it comes back to working at a grassroots level, engaging communities, and then preservation isn't an elitist thing. It's not, I mean, how many people here have heard, the Hysterical Commission? And it covers a very broad spectrum, but I think what people hear is it's going to cost more money, it's to save that building, and so we need to spread the arms more.
So in light of that, that actually kind of heads on another question. Are there other groups and movements that the preservation community can look to for inspiration in terms of how we move forward, or people or other movements or groups that we should be forming alliances with, kind of touching on what Maureen just said, to become more diverse, or groups that are, we're all working towards the same ultimate end goal, but we have slightly different viewpoints on it. But are there other groups that we should be looking to for inspiration?
Sure, so I'll go with that one, which I think is also in response to the first question, in terms of where we need to grow. It is all about constituency building for me. I think back, not in my current job in 1994, but I was certainly well aware of preservation in the early 90s. And I'm curious what everyone would think about. Do they think our constituency, the preservation constituency, is bigger in 2017 than it was in 1994, or has it declined? I don't know the answer because I don't have any concrete numbers on that, but I'm thinking our constituency has gone down. It would be hard to imagine a Duran Commission right now. I mean, we need something like that right now, and it's hard to imagine it happening. So we've had some wonderful successes, the CPA or tax credits, but we really need to, as Greg mentioned, we really need to think about, as everybody else is mentioning, grassroots constituency, building that up. And I don't think we necessarily need more preservationists out there. We need to find all the groups that have shared goals with all of us. And actually that's pretty easy in a lot of ways. I mean, there's so many shared goals that we can look to, certainly economic development being a big one, but there's lots of others, whether it's municipal officials and talking about how preservation can actually be really good in terms of the tax structure. How you grow is going to have a big impact. Are you going to sprawl? It's very expensive local property taxes, or are you going to grow in a way that could actually keep property taxes at a reasonable level? Keep municipal services down that way. So there's environmentalists that I think we could reach out to a lot more, land conservation community, educators that we could reach out to more, public transportation advocates, because public transportation and historic preservation go together perfectly. Housing advocates as well, I believe, affordable housing, or just not necessarily even affordable housing, but a broad mix of housing types that meets all kinds of demographics that are out there. We could be doing a lot more with that. Two areas that I think we really could reach out to that don't get talked a lot about are the whole idea of public health and the aspects of public health in terms of just the need for exercise and how walkable, bikeable communities and historic preservation work together perfectly. And then the whole sense of stress and emotional connection, the quality of life aspect there of historic preservation. In terms of all the studies that are out there in terms of how stressed we are as Americans, and yet how much a calming influence our historic resources can be on all of us. I think that's a real possibility there to talk about more. Yeah. And then I think there's an interesting, so not our current Surgeon General, the Surgeon General that lost his job earlier this year, he talks about the biggest health crisis out there is isolation, loneliness, isolation of people. That it's not heart attacks, it's not cancer, it's actually isolation. That is the biggest health crisis in his mind. And historic preservation is such an opportunity of community building, bringing people together, having those spontaneous ways of greeting people and just building up how we all spend time together in our downtowns, in our village centers, in our neighborhoods. I think that's a real connection there that we can make as well.
So while we're dreaming, I would love to see preservation be the default choice. Right now in most communities, demolition and new development is the default choice. And I think we can take a lesson from some other movements and push for reuse of existing buildings to be the responsible and sustainable choice. And we need to be much more vocal about that. That is the responsible and sustainable choice in many, many cases, rather than immediately defaulting to tear down that old building and let's build something that can be newer, better, more energy efficient. So I think we have a major challenge there in working with the components of modern society who have pushed sustainability and recycling. And it's a different argument than the old gas can poster from the National Trust back in the days of gas rationing, but it's still a valid argument. Part of the way we win that, I think, is to get people into buildings and talk about it when they're in there. The one thing that historic buildings can offer is an experience that is completely different from what you can get online or in a book or in another medium format. And unfortunately, when we take school groups to historic buildings, we don't allow them to explore the space. We don't allow them to do what they want to do, which is run up and down the stairs, climb up in the pulpit at the meeting house, play hide and seek behind the different features, touch things with their hands. Instead, when we take them to a museum or an historic building, we tell them to stay in line, stay in the group, don't touch anything. So you get to Old South Meeting House and you cannot go up in the pulpit. You get to the Boston MFA and you cannot run up the staircase. That's the way that kids explore space. And what they learn about historic buildings is you stay in one spot, you stay quiet, you listen carefully, you don't explore the space. So I think the challenge begins at a very early age that kids like to explore, they like to categorize, and historic preservation provides an opportunity for that type of exercise for young minds.
I would just touch on one point that Greg made, looking at like the U.S. Green Building Council, who does LEED certification. I don't think it's changed, but it used to be that you could get more points in LEED certification for having a manned parking spot than you could for saving a historic building. So I think from an educational perspective, to Greg's point, one of our jobs is to work with people in the sustainability community to emphasize the importance of historic preservation and how the embodied energy in these buildings is important, and how the buildings can meet most of these sustainability goals. I mean, there's even a new standard called Passive House out there, which is happening in Connecticut a lot, actually, because the Connecticut Housing and Finance Agency is pushing it. And it's nearly impossible to make a historic building meet those Passive House requirements. And there's no conversation about, instead of just saying, well, that doesn't work for us from the Passive House perspective, how can we make it work? How can we work together to make it, the sustainability guidelines work within historic preservation? For two reasons. One, to emphasize historic preservation is sustainable, and two, to bring more money to these types of projects.
Just real quick, talking about dreaming of constituencies that could partner together. My boss is on the Agriculture Committee in Congress, mostly because he is passionate about ending hunger, but we discovered when he got on the Agriculture Committee, especially in our new district that goes out to Northampton and Greenfield, that we have about more than 1,500 active farms in our community, and farmers are all about preservation, preserving land, keeping it growing, figuring out ways to utilize historic agricultural preservation restrictions and things like that to keep their farms going. And oftentimes on these farms, they are multi-generational farms with historic buildings on them. And I would love to figure out a way in the perfect world to have the farming community and the historic preservation community partner together so that we could maintain and preserve those farms and those buildings and also keep the land in production. So that might be an interesting. We do farm tours every year in August, so if the historic community would like to come along for 3 days and drink raw milk and eat great cheese, you're welcome. And then you'll see some really beautiful buildings as well.
Stacia, how many barn questions do you get every year?
I'll just add to that, and that is looking at unusual partnerships. I'm a cyclist. I like riding my bike, and I did a bike ride this summer called Farm to Fork Fondo, which is put on by a former professional cyclist. And he does them in areas across the country where you find farms, at least on the East Coast right now, in Vermont, the Finger Lakes in New York, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Hudson Valley, New York. So anywhere where you have farmers that are out there producing organic food, doing CSA programs, all these things. And he gives a speech at the beginning of the ride, and he talks about, you might wonder why we're doing cycling and combining it with farming. So we'll just imagine a cyclist, this is all the best land to ride through, right? This is where we love to ride our bike. This is what we want to see. This is where there are less cars, there's more attractions. This is stuff we really enjoy, and as we lose farms, we lose more good roads, we lose more opportunities to ride our bike. So how do we combine? So his whole idea around this movement that he's creating is to combine cycling and food and farming so that you can experience this, and there's a partnership that can arise to create heritage tourism and other things around these areas. So you don't know where those partners are, and how do you seek them out and find them in a way that emphasizes, you know, in this case, you're looking at cycling and farming, but to Kathleen's point, you know, historic preservation and farming and how those things work together to help communities.
Quickly, sometimes there's things like green building house tours, some things like that where you live. I think it's always interesting when I look and see these sustainable green building house tours, just how many miles you have to drive your car to go do the tour. Not like they're all together, they're not in walkable communities, they are out in the woods somewhere. These are not green homes. The green homes are the ones that are right in our village centers, the ones that you can actually walk to services, the ones that houses that have been there for a long, long time. There's a wonderful website, kind of like I can't remember the exact URL, but it's basically a walkability score website. So you can put in your address, or you can put in a city or whatever, and it will tell you what the walkability score is for that neighborhood. And it's a wonderful resource for preservationists to go, of course that has a high number because that's a historic neighborhood right there. It's very walkable.
You know, thinking about this, I mean, last year we just celebrated the 50th anniversary of the National Historic Preservation Act. So, you know, how much has changed in 50 years, how much has changed in a year? We're all kind of reeling from that. But, you know, thinking about the future of preservation, is it less about regulation and is it less of a, you know, like Maureen said, a lot of it was a reaction to urban renewal and people losing their communities, but now, is it more like neighborhoods? We heard a lot in Salem, we heard a lot of less concern about individual homes, but neighborhoods and places. I think it touched on, like Chris was saying, walkability and, you know, places and not just one individual house. George Washington's left here, or one specific really historic house, but just places and placemaking, storytelling in neighborhoods. Is that a shift that you see happening in preservation to make it more relevant and more, I would say, applicable to other groups, you know, to kind of, you know, coming to the table and saying we're less about putting this one specific building on the National Register, but more concerned about this entire neighborhood and making sure that it is sustainable and walkable and that there are, that its character isn't lost. Is that a shift that you think would be coming? This is just some of what we've heard.
Why not? I think the major challenge for us is to enable rather than restrict. And a lot of the format of historic preservation right now is based on restricting, not enabling. And whether that enabling means technical advice, or whether it means hands-on experience, or whether it means financial support, we don't do a very good job of enabling historic preservation in most communities. So that's the change I would like to see if we were going to shift focus. And I think it will take some time for the reputation of historic preservation to change. But I see it in some ways as a change from classical music to jazz. You know, right now, our historic preservation frameworks are based on how closely can you adhere to what's written.
So you would change the Secretary of State standard?
Well, that's a place to start.
Yeah.
But you know, that's a classical standard. You know, can you take this Mozart sonata and make it your own while playing all the notes that he wrote, as opposed to a jazz standard where the goal is to play the notes that are not there. And while we've had some very creative solutions in historic preservation, I think we're missing a major part of society by not allowing preservation to be more jazz-like, more creative?
I think, I'm not sure the focus has changed. I think that people have always wanted to save what makes that place special, about their neighborhood, about their community, about their social circle, their economic circle. And there are tools in place. There's the historic tax credit. There's as Greg said, there's things you can't do. But my sense is these groups are looking for tools, and I think organizations like Historic Massachusetts, I'm sure you were saying, you get calls all the time about barns, or they're looking for tools for how can they have a voice, how can they make a difference, and so it's not going to be all regulation. It's going to be helping them with grassroots organization, might be how to negotiate, how to speak to elected officials, but to give them a voice where they feel like they're being heard, to save to what is important to them, and it might not be Mount Vernon or the Massachusetts State House. It's something intangible, and that's hard to regulate.
Well, I wonder if we need to be thoughtful about being really disruptive. In the 90s, Historic Massachusetts PreservationMass was fairly engaged in trying to support. I just went right out of my head. When you use the National Register to teach, which was Teach with Historic Places, thank you, which was a program that the National Trust really pushed in the 90s, which the idea then was that you have this amazing amount of scholarship done for National Register districts, National Register buildings. I'll say that scholarship we do now, Maureen, is much better than they did then, I think, personally, but you had all this scholarship in place over these resources, and all it did was sit in a drawer. And was there a way to take this as an educational piece? And I think the reason I'm touching on that is, my mom told me to be very polite, so I won't guess what the average age in the room is at the moment, but certainly, how do you reach the younger generations? I have a 15-year-old daughter, so I talk to her a lot about these different things, actually. And I think about things about how do you create a disruption from a historic preservation standpoint. For instance, when you pull into any town, depending on how your phone works, I have all these apps that pop up and Yelp says, welcome to Worcester. Here are the 9 great restaurants you should eat in, or whatever. I mean, is there a way to get historic preservation tied into those kind of GIS systems where information would pop up? At least people would think about it. They might not visit your historic site, but at least they would be there and active and engaged. But how do we do that? I mean, is there ways to have photography classes in high school where kids go out and look at historic buildings? I mean, the appreciation of historic buildings comes to all of us in different ways, but we don't really teach that anymore, I don't think, as much. I mean, even architects these days are much more screen-oriented and looking at their computer and designing through CAD than they used to be. So what can we do to support the tools you need to do this appreciation, and then combine that with the awareness to get people engaged? And I'm not sure what that is, but I certainly think it needs to start at a younger age. We need to engage those groups, and maybe it's through CDCs or other youth groups that exist in these urban areas, especially, that can help us get that ball rolling. And I would also touch on Maureen's point a little bit about, I think Greg's coming at it from the historic standards perspective. I think Maureen really touched on, how do we look at history and how do we make this history important to people that might only have been in America for the last 20 years or 25 years, and how do we engage on that front and tell more stories about those things? So I do think that, historic preservation has been between the lines pretty much since the Acts of '66, and is, to Greg's point with jazz, it's a really nice reference. How do we kind of get out of those lines a little bit to involve more people and engage them more actively in what we're doing?
So being for local government programs at Mass Historical Commission, I'm regularly on the phone regarding a local bylaw, a local ordinance of some kind. I am deep in the aspect of the regulatory part of historic preservation. And so that gets right to the heart of being able to regulate what is allowed on the exterior of a building. So I get lots and lots of phone calls that this is where they want to go. They want that regulatory tool at the local level. And I probably, when I first started my job, I went along with that. And as I've spent more and more time in this, I'm often finding myself talking them out of that avenue. I met with a commission at one point, and I said, a committee that was looking at a local historic district, so the ability to prevent changes to the exterior of the building. I said, okay, who here lives in this neighborhood that's proposed for a local historic district? And nobody raised their hands. I then said, okay, we got one problem. I said, okay, who here has talked to people that live in this proposed local historic district? And nobody raised their hands. So we got two big problems. And I spent the next hour and a half trying to talk them out of doing a local historic district. So I do that a lot on the phone now too, because it's not the only way, and it's really not the best way. So I often do the counterintuitive reality. You can do historic preservation with only non-regulatory tools. Lots and lots of things you can do through non-regulatory tools. You can do historic preservation with regulatory tools and non-regulatory tools. What you can't do is do historic preservation with only regulatory tools. That is the recipe for failure. Will not work. It will go down in flames in your community if you try to only use a regulatory tool. So in terms of education and appreciation, I often try to, I used to use the word education, and I've actually stopped using the word education as much as possible. I try to, somebody else use the word appreciation. And that's the word that I go for a lot, because education sounds like I know what's right and you don't. And I know, so I've used this example of, I'm not particularly a big fan of public art, public sculpture, and things like that. There's one that's near my work, and there was some pushback, and the person that was in charge of getting these public sculptures placed sent out a letter basically explaining the significance of this public piece of art. And his letter was basically saying, you know, if you learn about this public piece of art, you'll have the same amount of appreciation that I do. And I just cringed when I read the letter, because it sounded so much like the way we talk. Like if we just educate you, you're going to appreciate it just as much as we do. And it's really about taking a much softer approach for me, about just leading people into preservation and not really trying to say, we're right, and all you need to do is learn what we know.
Because Chris, you talked a lot about, I think you were at 5 or 6 meetings, and the whole concept of not necessarily relying on historic commissions to be the only, driver.
Thank you for going there, because I wanted to do that too.
to be the only local driver of preservation, and how it sometimes can work against you, and really you were a big advocate of encouraging people to form, like friends groups and local, forming local nonprofits, because they can do the advocacy work and foster that appreciation that a regulatory town commission may not necessarily be able to. So, I think that was something that we actually saw, and you brought up, and I think people didn't really realize it when we were on our tour. Do you want to expand on that?
Sure. So I had started on, I like to draw the comparison between the land protection community and the historic preservation community, meaning that the land protection community really headed down the road of local nonprofit organizations as land trusts. And we have somewhere over 400 local land trusts in Massachusetts. We have more land trusts than we have cities and towns. Historic preservation headed down the road of municipal government trying to do historic preservation through a local government. And I look over at that land conservation community with admiration and say, oh, I think we need to head more towards that direction. Because you're so limited in what we can do at the local level through municipal government. You're stuck with real limitations of a local board, so all kinds of fundraising is so much more difficult. Advocacy is so much more difficult. Constituency building, it's like trying to have the zoning board of appeals do constituency building. I mean, we can't have historical commissions acting in that kind of capacity. So the idea for me is that the land trust model, where we have lots and lots of local nonprofit organizations that can not only do that can do a lot of the things that a historical commission can't do, and a lot of the things, whether that's fundraising, advocacy, but also the positive messaging, getting across the way a land trust will have all kinds of fun events. Fun. I see all kinds of things that the land trust communities do. And it's just social, it's enjoyable. And what do we do on the preservation side? We have a public hearing. We need to have a lot more events at the local level. It just feels good because we enjoy what we're doing. We want to bring people in on that. So I'm really trying to encourage lots more local nonprofits where I can. And that's one of the things. So we are working on our state plan right now, and that's certainly one of the things to get across in that state plan is that really we don't have very many local nonprofits in Massachusetts. New Bedford, Preservation Worcester, Historic Salem, Boston, Springfield Preservation Trust. Most of the places in Massachusetts don't have any kind of a local nonprofit advocacy organization. I'd like to see a lot more of those.
And more fun social events. So Jim, next year's Cruising the Commonwealth will have cocktail hours. Actually, Jim wants to be on a boat. We actually had people thinking we were literally on a boat.
Just to Chris's point, I think one of the things obviously that's different with land trusts is the use of the property and how you can enjoy and recreate there. And it's harder in some houses to, I think Greg's point. I just wanted to mention an organization that's trying to do something like that, which we're doing some work with here in Worcester, but they're based in Boston, is the Arts and Business Council. They're a group of professionals that are trying to provide basically back of the house business services to artist groups. So the idea there is that they have the expertise to wherewithal to do this. And what they're trying to do is literally create what they call a creative campus across Massachusetts by starting by acquiring buildings to then turn into art uses. And I think that's, when you look at partners, it's a great partnership from that perspective. The project we're working on here in Worcester is the former Boys Club on Ionic Ave, which they're trying to turn into a local artist facility run by, managed by two local women artists who are really interested in that. And what they're doing is providing all the back of the house support to get that up and running. They'll actually acquire the building. They'll manage the mortgage. They'll help them with the business side of it. But it's really up to the arts group in that community to program the building and engage. And I think that's a model or an example of how we might be able to bring other groups into historic preservation, because the use obviously of that building is an arts center. And we've seen lots of art centers fail. There's a lot of firehouses that have been converted to art centers over the years that haven't quite made it. So I think the thing that's trying to be different here with Jim Grace and his group is to have that umbrella organization that can help, really make this happen. So I do agree that there needs to be more nonprofits kind of focused on the idea of engaging these buildings and engaging people in these buildings and how do you support it. And maybe it is a bigger network that we need that can help because, 351 towns are a lot of places. So finding 351 nonprofits might be a little more difficult from that perspective. But I just wanted to mention that group since I think they are trying to do a good job.
To follow on that, I am active in the Boston Harbor Islands National Park. I serve on the Boston Harbor Islands Partnership. I was appointed by the Secretary of Interior many years ago. But there's several nonprofit organizations that are involved in the Harbor Islands, and they are really focused on bringing City of Boston kids out to the islands. And they mark their success by how many kids they get out to the islands each summer, between Save the Harbor, Save the Bay, and Boston Harbor Island Alliance. And it might be 13,000, 20,000 kids in Thompson Island Outward Bound. But most of these kids didn't know Boston had a harbor islands. B, have never even seen the harbor. And these are kids who live in Dorchester, Roxbury, Hyde Park. But they think it's not a perfect model, but a model we've talked about getting young people involved, is having something that gets young people involved in historic preservation in some fashion. And where you can measure your success by how many kids you've got, who have been able to run upstairs or there's so many cool things about historic buildings and properties. So just, I think engaging youth is another, as Albert mentioned, in terms of our rising demographic.
So I think that the notion that we need to have more not-for-profits involved is exactly right, because I feel like we haven't talked about sort of the elephant in the room yet, and working for a member of Congress to talk about it is, the fact that in the president's budget, he cut the Department of the Interior budget by 12%, right? So that Department of Interior has National Park Service within it. He cut $5.5 million out of the National Park Service budget, which is a huge percentage of their budget. So we're not going to have the staff that we are used to if this is the budget that we end up with. And then you talk about, the reconciliation came forward with the budget, and really all it did was facilitate how to bring a tax bill to the floor in the House and the Senate. And so the House tax bill should go to the floor under a closed roll, which means that there will be no amendments next week. And as some of us know, the Senate's legislation came out today and will go to reconciliation, will go to committee next week. So all of the programs that we care about that make the puzzle of what facilitates historic preservation are completely under attack. As we've heard, maybe under the Senate legislation, which I haven't read completely, that historic tax credits are included. They're not included under the House. But it's not just historic tax credits, it's new market tax credits, it's municipal bonds, it's advanced refunding bonds, it's low-income housing credits. I could go on and on and on. So I think we're talking about something that's really important, and how do we expand historic preservation in our communities. But I think one of the ways that we can do that is to make sure that we reach out, especially to Senate members, not necessarily our own delegation, because they all get it, but other members of the Senate, especially if you have family in other states or friends in other states that you can reach out to and ask them to advocate for the things that we really care about, because they could all go away. And then we're going to really be depending on the not-for-profits, which I think are an important piece, but shouldn't be the only piece, to make sure that the things that we care about are preserved, whether it be open space or housing or historic properties. So I know we're coming kind of, okay, but I just had to give my little spiel because it's so really, really important, and it will devastate historic preservation in this country if we don't get some leverage and some traction in the tax bills that are going to be reconciled in the next little bit.
I know we could keep this, I know this was a very short panel discussion.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. And I know the collective experience that we have represented in the panel is just absolutely tremendous. And we can keep going on and on and on and on. And we will hopefully be involving all of you in our little summit that we're going to be working for in 2018. But just wanted to open up if anyone had any, any final thoughts.
So if I just really fast, I just wanted to, I know I can't help it. I just really want to say that I was super excited to be included on this panel because the fabulous Deborah Packard was unable to come. Susan is here from Preservation Worcester, but I'm told that that Deborah couldn't be here tonight because she's becoming a grandmother. So if everyone could have happy and positive thoughts in their head for her tonight, that would be great.
Well, thank you all so very, very much for being on this very important panel. And I think this is a great more captured live. We have captured the discussion because I think your thoughts are all so very, very important. And, we look to you, we look at you as leaders in our preservation community. And this is really a stepping stone to putting, to really trying to meet our priorities in the next several years. I know there's going to be, I think there's a lot of potential for change, and I think it's all going to be good and positive. And like we said, we want to keep an open channel for thoughts and conversation. So if any of our attendees this evening or people who watch us on YouTube have thoughts, they're going to be able to share those with Preservation Massachusetts. So thank you all very, very much for coming. And just two housekeeping notes before you leave. If you didn't attend our statewide conference, we have little gifts for you outside in case it's raining. We have a little, you are entitled to take a free Preservation Massachusetts umbrella. They will be available outside for you upon leaving. But before we go, we are going to be sent off by the wonderful Bill Wallace, the Executive Director of the Worcester Historical Museum, and hosted our event this evening.
Where the wonderful part came from. Whatever Jim told you earlier of rumors of my death or retirement, much exaggerated. I was actually at another meeting. But I did want to thank you for coming here tonight, and I want to thank this panel for what I think is a very exciting conversation, because it's exactly the conversation we have here every single day. But how do we, as a parallel history organization, we are not the preservation advocates for Worcester, but we are the keepers of Worcester's history, the archive of the experience of Worcester. And every day we struggle with, are challenged by, or get excited by the fact that everything you've talked about is what we deal with. That it's now about placemaking, it's about storytelling, it's about being a troublemaker, it's understanding the value of it all. When Jim arrived, and I was here when he arrived because I want to make sure he didn't steal anything. No, Jim, too long. We were actually engaged in a conversation with members of the school department, because we will be the 5th grade Culture Leap this year. It's a program, Culture Leap is a program of the Worcester Public Schools funded by the Alden Trust, with some support from the Stoddard Charitable Trust. And these kids go to a cultural organization. Last year, for the last 5 years, we had every first grader in here, running up the stairs, looking at spaces, handling objects, looking at manuscripts, looking at documents, and realizing that they are part of the Worcester story. And hopefully we've engaged them in a way that they will become better advocates. This year will be the 5th grade, and so we'll have a little bit deeper conversation with them. But when they come here, they don't stand in line. We don't say to them, Jim Igo was born in 1792. He graduated from college in 1843. We don't tell them any of that stuff. We ask them to tell us stories about their Worcester, and then we anchor those stories in reality. We're all talking about the same game. We're all partners in making exciting places we live in. And it reminds me of 2 things. Abby Kelly Foster is the second portrait from the end of the wall down there. And as I sat there, I thought, if I hear one more time about making a goddamn historic house museum out of her house, I'm going to spit nails. That's just like, not the answer, people. Just, time to move on. The decline of the Jewish community in Worcester, they want to make a museum out of Sheraton West. I told them they'd be more successful to put in a wet bar. They told me they couldn't do that in an Orthodox show. I didn't know that. But as we talk about this, I got a phone call about a meeting tomorrow about the Main Street redesign project in Worcester, where they want a slew of historic markers along Main Street. And I keep saying, but it's not going to sell the concept of placemaking. People aren't going to come. If they're not excited, they're not going to come. They might come to the opening because it might be booze. But after that, they're going to walk past them, and they're going to put bumper stickers on them for Jim McGovern's next political campaign. Or the Deadhead concert that's going to be at the Centrum. It's not the way we sell history. It's not the way we make community. And because Jim is getting itchy, I know. Oh, good. What it really leads me to is that I think we are at a significant moment in Worcester, because Worcester is going to create a master plan, a vision for the future of Worcester. One for just sort of the basic concept of what is the Worcester we want, and the other part of it is going to how the hell are we going to do it. And if we blow that moment, and we don't have every voice from every sphere in Worcester at the table and deal with the issues that you've all been talking about, then we all go out of business. We've got to stand up. We've got to be counted and say, it's about us, it's about wayfinding, it's about place. I don't mean wayfinding, it's about placemaking, it's about storytelling, and it's the excitement that we all convey on a daily basis, whether it's for our own well-being or for the preservation of the community. So we're really glad that you're here, and I think this was a great conversation. I can't wait to show it to my staff. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Bill. I want to thank the whole panel, Greg, Maureen, Chris, Kathleen, and my friend Albert. You guys were great. And I'm sorry it was so short. this could have been a 2-hour conversation. We kind of knew that, but this is kind of the tip of the iceberg for what we hope to do in either January, February, depending on our schedule. We'd love to have you back. For all of you who have come tonight, I know it's a little bit of a sparse crowd, but I hope it's been educational, hour and a half, whatever. So on behalf of Preservation Massachusetts, Erin, panelists, our board, thank you all, and we'll see you again soon.
Good luck in Washington, huh?
Oh, yeah. Oh, fingers crossed, right? Fingers crossed.
Good night.
Yeah, now I know. Yeah. Sure, no, I'm happy to, yes. They're interesting. All the right clients. Yeah, I said I want to put, right, stuff this, right, so that. Actually, I don't think so. Interesting. I need a copy of it too.
Always at the very bottom of my purse. No matter where I put it, it seems, I know. It's almost like my purse, the Mary Poppins bag. Things just disappear in there.
Thank you.
So let me know if there's anything.
Well, we're
I
going
know,
to,
but what happens to Vibrant?
but that's what I was just going to say. We need Vibrant. We're going to have to go back at them.
Because we had called the president while he was in Italy. Called, and they said they were still working on the physical complex and the apartments next year. That was last year.
Well, we will get in our place where we're going to be meeting them because we're going to be doing a capital campaign, and we need them to come out. And the other, yeah, we got to get all our ducks in a row because we
Will there be more cookies? Because those cookies are spectacular. Oh my gosh.
we had a meeting with